Hello, everyone. I'm Scott Moore, and you're watching the SMC Journal podcast, where it's all about performance engineering in IT today. So, you may recall that the 2022 season of the Performance Tour, which is happening right now, we released episode 3 in March, and it was all about database performance issues. And we had interviews with Kevin Klein, author of SQL in a Nutshell, as well as David Daly, the performance engineer for MongoDB, the product. So we only have so much time in those monthly videos to share with you what we can, and they're probably longer than many people want them to be. We try to compress them, and then we release the full interviews later on. But there was one other person that I really wanted to talk to about database performance issues, and he's on my program today. We're going to be talking with Mick McGinnis of DBMarlin about the top 3 or so performance issues with databases that he is seeing in 2022. DBMarlin is a product that I use and talk about a lot all the time. This is not a commercial for DBMarlin, and they're not a sponsor. However, I do believe in their product because they provide SQL profiling information across multiple database types or brands of databases that help the performance engineer dig deeper beyond what a typical test result or analysis report would show. And so because of that, it helps you really get into the database and pull out specific detailed performance information that can lead you to fixing a problem. And sometimes that can be pretty drastic, as I'm going to share in this program today. So before we bring on Mick, let's talk about our great sponsors today that make this podcast happen, including my friends at Micro Focus. Performance matters, and Micro Focus has the largest community of performance engineers in the world. They are the makers of LoadRunner Professional, Enterprise, Cloud, and Developer. Scan that QR code or check out the links that we've got in our show notes or on the smcjournal.com, and you can check out their performance engineering page about the LoadRunner family and their performance playlist on YouTube as well. We're also sponsored by StormForge. The StormForge platform allows you to focus on your business using an AI-powered platform that's designed to help your DevOps team release with confidence and let your IT leaders realize the promise of what cloud native is supposed to bring to you. Higher quality, resilient applications, scalable applications, and efficient applications. Check them out today at stormforge.io or just scan that QR code. And don't forget about our friends at Bright Payment Solutions at brighteps.com. They provide merchant services for a wide variety of credit card companies, and they take most credit cards and have the lowest rates and fees possible. So they help your business generate higher amounts of revenue through a variety of payment solutions. They actually have their own point of sale equipment as well. So make sure you check out brighteps.com. Tell them Scott Moore sent you, and thank them for supporting the performance testing community. So, on with our interview today with Mick McGinnis of DBMarlin. Hello, I am with Mr. Mick McGinnis of DBMarlin. How are you, sir?
Hi, Scott. Yes, I'm very well, thank you.
Welcome to the podcast. So, I've known you for a few years now, and I've been working with you on the DBMarlin product. I actually recommend this and use this myself. Today's show is talking about the top database performance issues that we see, and that's what you do every day. You help customers troubleshoot SQL issues, any kind of performance with their database, multiple kinds of databases, and you work hand in hand with load testing products to kind of give them a deeper dive if their tool doesn't show that analysis. So that's why I wanted to talk to you today. So I'm wondering, we're in April of 2022, you've got customers out there who are fixing database issues. What are the things that they come to you for, the problems that are kind of the top few problems that you're seeing that you're helping customers with today?
Yes, so I guess a lot of the top problems we see with databases are the same problems that we've seen for many years. We've been doing database performance monitoring and optimization for more than 20 years now, working with various different products, including products that we built ourselves. But usually you can think of databases when they're actively processing user requests. They're either using the CPU or they're doing some disk I/O. I mean, that's what databases do. They're retrieving data or they're writing data. Or they could be suffering some kind of contention, such as lock-in. So those are the kind of the big three things we still see. And depending on which kind of those cases you kind of fall into, there's different things that you can do, obviously, to optimize those. So yeah, those are still the big three things we see. So I can dive into a bit more detail on some of those if you like.
Well, have those things changed? In other words, are you fighting new problems, new fires that have only been around a couple of years because as we've progressed, problems have morphed into something new, or are we still dealing with the same problems we were 5, 10, 15 years ago?
So a lot of the problems are still the same problems they always have been. Obviously, one thing that has changed and is always changing is the volume of data that companies have. It's always increasing, data kind of doubling every couple of years. And obviously that's a challenge then for data access times when your data is just constantly getting bigger and bigger. And data is obviously critical for companies these days. It's their competitive advantage, I guess. There's a lot of studies that say data is more valuable than oil or gold or whatever these days. So having fast access to that data is really critical for customers.
Well, let's dive into what we were referring to just now. Was somebody comes to DBMarlin saying, help, help, I've got this problem. What's a typical problem that you would walk customers through? Because I know it's more than just a product. You actually offer professional services as well. So tell us how you might help them find and fix a database performance issue, a typical one.
So customers that have database performance problems, that they could look at DBMarlin, and they could just download the free product. We have a free offer where anybody can monitor one database free of charge forever. So they could download the free product and see if they can fix problems themselves. And what we've tried to do in the product is make it as easy as possible by providing help in the form of a knowledge base and recommendations. So people could download the product, point it at their database, and that will tell them things like what are the top SQL statements, what are the wait events, so is it waiting on things like CPU or disk I/O or other types of locking and contention. As I mentioned, those have been the top things. And then once they've identified where the bottleneck is, they can then use the knowledge base, which will give them kind of guidance as to what they might want to do, and that will be different depending on what type of wait event it is. Or if they get into the area where they need help, around rewriting SQL statements or indexing and those kinds of things, then they can call on us and we can provide some services to help them.
I want to make sure that I let people know I highly recommend that knowledge base out there, because if you're getting a specific, like if you're dealing with a specific weight or some specific thing from an execution plan, or you've got notes out there for every single thing, a quick note that says this is what this means, but you also have links to, like, you've already pre-searched Google for some of the answers for these things, right?
That's right, yeah. So if you're using the product, even if you're using the free product, the knowledge base is linked. So any wait event or any execution plan step, you can click through, and that knowledge base is over 1,000 articles, and we're continuing to add more all the time. But it's also freely available. If you go to docs.dbmarlin.com, anybody can use that, whether they're using the product or not. It's all searchable, and you can usually find the answers that you need.
Yeah, that's a very valuable resource, and I will make sure to put the link in our show notes for that to direct people there. So let's talk about a specific example. I know I worked with you to reference you to a customer who had come to me last year that was having a problem with all of this online traffic from people being educated at home because of the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about that one, because it's a great story?
Yes, yeah, that was a great example of you know, optimization. Obviously, you'd done the front end part of that and helped them optimize the application side around their PHP stack and that side of things, and then handed over to us to look at the database side, which was it was a MySQL database in their case, and they had a fairly large server. It was 24 CPU cores and about half a terabyte of RAM. Um, and so, yeah, and the problem that they had was that their CPUs, all 24 of them, were just maxed out, 100% CPU all the way through the day when people were trying to use this system. And what that meant for end users, they were getting response times, 20, 30 seconds in some cases. So we installed the product to monitor for a short period of time, and then very quickly we could see the root cause of the problems. So they had um, a set of statements that were just way out there at the top of the list that were all spending their times sorting data. And you could see that very clearly in MySQL. There's a wait event called sorting data. And you could also see that was the thing that was causing the CPU to be completely maxed out there. So having looked at the statements, we got into the execution plan. We looked at what it was trying to do. And in this case, it was only querying from a single table. And it had two where clause conditions. So I can't remember the name of the columns, but column A and column B. And in column A and column B, each had an index. So the first index would maybe filter down to like 20,000 rows, and the second index would filter down to maybe another 20,000 rows. And then what MySQL was having to do was then merge those results. And the way it had to merge those results is by basically sorting both result sets so that you could do a sort merge join. And sorting is one of those things with databases. It's very CPU intensive. So anytime you see sorting or aggregation in the execution plan, that's normally a potential source of a CPU bottleneck. So what we were able to do for the customer in this case was we created a new index for them. Rather than having the two individual indexes on A and B, we created a combined index on both columns, A and B. And what that meant was then, because the index is already sorted, the data could be retrieved a lot more efficiently, and it would come back in the order that it was needed. And by adding that index, sorry, I should have said the table size in this case was about 500 million rows. By adding the index, that query that was taking 20, 30 seconds then started to run in less than a second. And then the CPU on the server, which was maxed out at 100% across all the 24 CPU cores, that came right down to 10%. So that was a massive, massive win there. And that was all just by adding a single index to the database.
I think about that. It's sort of low hanging fruit, really, but because you focus on your performance engineers, and that's why you built DBMarlin. You built it for performance engineers as well. It was low hanging fruit. You make this one change that made this massive thing. I'm sure there were other things that you changed that also made a difference, but that was like the main thing, and it brought it from pegged to 10%. Now all of a sudden things are taking a lot less time, and customers are now suddenly delighted. Now the pressure is off of the person who initially contacted us for help. It's a win-win situation, and I love to hear stories about that. And that's a pretty common occurrence, right?
It is, yeah, and as well as obviously the impact on the end user, which was the main win for them. In that case, they could run on a much smaller server size, so they could actually save on their cloud hosting costs as well. So that's another win for them. It turned out in the end they didn't need a huge 24 CPU core machine with all that RAM. They could actually run on a much smaller machine and still get the level of performance they needed. So yeah, we see that all the time. There's always been this kind of tendency to throw hardware at problems, when in actual fact, a lot of performance problems can be solved just by looking at tuning on the database side, and doesn't actually need the extra hardware.
I agree. I've seen that my whole career. The Band-Aid that fixes nothing. It masks it for a little while and then reappears. This is great. So, what else can you tell us about the product, I guess, vision for DBMarlin? Like, where do you take it? Because I know that you've just released, at the time of this recording, we've just had a notice that 2.3 is here, and you now have this snapshot feature. And I should mention, this product really, I wouldn't say you necessarily focus on load testing or you focus on performance testers, but it's so useful for performance engineers because you're running test after test after test, and you need to compare. Am I getting better? Am I getting worse? We made some changes. Let's rerun a test. Or is the trend line going up or down? The snapshots that you just introduced, they kind of help that process make it a lot easier, right?
Yeah. So that's load testing is one of the use cases for our performance snapshot feature. So to explain what they are, a snapshot is where you take a period of time that you're interested in, maybe with some filters applied to it, and then you keep that data at the maximum granularity. So in our case, that's 1 second granularity. And then you basically archive that off. So it doesn't get aggregated up and purged like the rest of the data, which will eventually lose its granularity over time. We keep that record then indefinitely, or as long as you need that data. So it means you could store that load test, that's your baseline that you want to compare against. And then even, 6 months later, 12 months later, you can still compare back against that. So definitely when we created that feature, load testing was one of the kind of use cases that we were thinking of, but it's also useful for other things as well. So people use this feature if they want to keep their peak trading periods, like Black Fridays and things like that, or if they have an incident and they want to keep a record of that incident and then store that along with the incident record so they can refer back to it at future points in time. So yeah, lots of uses for that, and it's not a feature that you really see in other monitoring products. With other monitoring products, data does tend to just get rolled up and then eventually lost.
Can you tell us anything else that you might want to share with our users going forward, that what your plans are for DBMarlin, where you want to take the product, where you want to end up?
Yeah, so we're always looking to expand the range of platforms we support. So at the moment, we're covering relational databases. We've got Oracle SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, MariaDB, and recently added IBM DB2 and CockroachDB. So we've got quite a lot of coverage already, but we're looking to obviously continue to expand that into some of the newer technologies, possibly some of the NoSQL databases as well. But at the same time, what we're trying to do is put as much kind of expert knowledge into the product, so you don't have to be a deep DBA with lots of years of performance tuning experience. You could be a performance tester, you could be a DevOps engineer or an SRE or a developer who's just looking to tune the database or tune your own code. Because what we're seeing now is obviously there's a shift towards cloud. If you're using cloud database as a service, then that obviously takes some of the tasks that a traditional DBA would do in terms of installing the database, applying the patches and upgrades and things like that, the backups. So there's a lot of that has been taken away now. So in some cases, you get applications where there isn't an actual DBA. Some companies don't have DBAs anymore. But then it falls down to these other roles, like I mentioned, that now need to be able to optimize the database performance and the SQL statements running within it. So what we're trying to do, it's kind of been our goal from the start, is basically make it as easy as possible so that anybody, even if you're not a deep database performance expert, anybody can still take the product and get value from it and start optimizing their database.
I'll just tell you my personal opinion on what you just said about where DBAs are kind of going away, and also performance engineers are being replaced by SREs who don't necessarily focus on performance. They're supposed to know everything about performance, security, and functionality. Extra stuff that in other words, we're getting away from specialization and we're going into this general knowledge. and we go wherever we need to go to fix whatever the solution is of the day, and we try to automate all the toil, and I get it, right? But I feel like there's still going to be a need for that specialization when you need optimized an optimized way of deployment for that. And what I mean by that is I've seen over and over where a developer says, I don't need a database architect to help me architect the database I'm going to create for this application because I know as much as they do. And then they end up creating this database that is not optimized for the app. And then they end up having to get consulting help from a DBA to come and fix that problem, and they realized they needed to re-architect the whole thing. And if they had just contacted them to begin with, I'm not saying they need them for everything, but now you're trying to fix that problem or help that problem here. I kind of see it as on the flip side, I know I'm not a DBA. I don't want to know as much as a DBA, but I want to be able to maybe do as much as I can before I have to go to a DBA for help. Or if I'm troubleshooting an issue, I want to be able to hand them something where they can go, oh yeah, just change this and it fixes the problem. So we take, work away from them that they don't have to do, they shouldn't be doing, let them do more important work, and just kind of to guide it. So that's the use case for me with DBMarlin, but I don't know if you want to give your opinion about that, but I think the specialization, getting rid of specialization is a mistake, and I think we'll eventually get bitten by that. Do you agree?
I do, yeah, I think so. Yeah, there are certain roles that we do see in decline, but I actually think the tasks that need to be done are still the same as they always were. So somebody needs to pick up that responsibility, and yeah, it may just be that people end up having different titles. So maybe they're not called a DBA anymore. Maybe they're called DevOps database engineer or something else. They have different titles, but I still think the skills are the things that are important, and they're just as important as they ever were.
Skills need to be there. The same tasks need to be done. They need to be done with the same excellence as they did before, or things will suffer. So it's just going to be proven out. So, Mick, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, and we'll be looking forward to where you're taking DBMarlin in the future. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention?
Just that if you want to have a look at the product, dbmarlin.com. Like I said earlier, you can get a free license, and the knowledge base is docs.dbmarlin.com, so that can help. Both of those are free resources, so yeah, check those out.
And I should mention there's a VIP page out there for friends of mine, people who watch this podcast. If you're watching, there's a link I'm going to put in my show notes. You go there, and Mick will actually treat you better. They actually treat friends of mine better than
Right.
They treat everybody the same, but friends of mine are special people. So thank you again for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott.
All right. Another fine interview by my friends at DBMarlin. Now, I wanted to show you a graphic of this use case that we mentioned in the interview, and let's go to this image here. It's very dramatic. I mean, this is where you love the end of an engagement where you find something like this, where Mick was talking about there was a customer who had their CPUs were pegged on the database. Everywhere it was pegged. And it was a traditional PHP web-based product where they had a web server. It's running probably Apache web server. It's running an older version of MySQL. It was just a traditional app, but it was for educational purposes. And of course, that became really important through 2020 and 2021. And so they reached out to me, and we did some initial troubleshooting between me and the client, but I knew that the database was the problem. There was some low-hanging fruit on the web server side. The database definitely was the issue, and you can see it right here. This is the snapshot feature that's available in DBMarlin of two different points in time of what was going on, and they're able to save that off apparently now with the new 2.3 version. But look at period A. These were all the waits that were happening over that period of time that were isolated. And if you were to click on any of these statements where you see the different colors, you could drill into the various statements. But the big zinger here is available CPU and memory, right? 100%, pretty much pegged throughout a day, right? It's just being hammered. And then changes were made. some indexes were fixed. There were some other things that were done, but look at the period after that. It was reduced by 97%. Notice there's no top weights or top statements over on the right hand side. It's just blank. And look at that CPU, a nice less than 10% all throughout the day. This was being hammered the same amount. And that's what a difference can. Now you will see that CPU utilization from a typical load testing tool. But then the next question is, well, why? So we take this profiler information that's able to go deep into the database and say, here's the actual statements, here's the actual tables that are being hit, here's the reads and the writes, and separating all this stuff out, where qualified DBAs would go in there with their own tools. They have SQL profiling tools, and they can look at this stuff as well. But hey, if we've got this, when we run a load test, we can not only see the typical information, but let's look at that SQL profiler information at the same time, drill down. Now we can actually go to the DBA and say, look what we found. And they go, oh, well, this is pretty easy to change. And it's that initial low-hanging fruit that made the biggest difference in the CPU utilization coming down. And then there's some additional tuning that could be done after that. But wow, what a great difference. Just by making that one change from one day to another day, different client experience. Now they're getting praised online. I actually saw social media saying, thank you so much to this company for making that change. You've made a big difference in our experience and our education of our child, getting certified in this, whatever they were doing. I think it's great. That's the kind of stuff we like to see. What do you think about this? And what do you think about database issues? What are some of the top database issues that your company deals with from a performance perspective? You can always reach me at scottmoore.consulting. There's a link to my LinkedIn profile, the URL for that, as well as my Twitter handle, which is @LoadTester. And you can always reach me by email as well. Just shoot me an email at help@scottmoore.consulting. Would really appreciate it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's growing every day. Want to say a special thank you to everybody who has subscribed and all the feedback that I have been getting recently about the show, and that you like it and that you're watching it and that you want to see more. So that's why we're continuing to bring it to you. So that's what we're talking about today, database issues. I hope you enjoyed it for the SMC Journal podcast. This is Scott Moore, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.